The subcommittee hearing on unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAPs, will come to order.
There are certain individuals who didn't want this hearing to happen because they feared what might be disclosed. But we stood firm. No amount of outside pressure would ever keep me from pursuing a subject come hell or high water.
It is my honor and privilege to testify before you on the issue of unidentified anomalous phenomenon, formerly known as UFOs. Let me be clear. UAP are real. Advanced technologies not made by our government or any other government are monitoring sensitive military installations around the globe.
Mr. Elizondo, what is your last position with the federal government?
Sir, I was the Director of National Program Special Management Staff managing a White House Special Access Program on behalf of the National Security Council.
How would you characterize UAPs?
An enigma, sir, and a frustration. We're talking about technologies that can outperform anything we have in our inventory. And if this was an adversarial technology, this would be an intelligence failure eclipsing that of 9/11 by an order of magnitude.
Has the government conducted secret UAP crash retrieval programs, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, were they designed to identify and reverse engineer alien craft, yes or no?
Yes.
I'm Paul Jeffrey Davids. It was 30 years ago that I was executive producer and co-writer of the story of this film for Showtime called Roswell, also released as Roswell, the UFO coverup. This was the only film ever produced to dramatize the events of the 1947 reported UFO crash near Roswell, New Mexico, as reported, as eventually described by the witnesses, military and otherwise, who were coerced into keeping their silence about what had really happened for decades.
What we're really talking about is the possibility of cosmic cultures meeting. Has it already happened that mankind has had a contact with or connection with a cosmic culture from somewhere else in the solar system or galaxy? Recently, there was a major conference in Washington, D.C. called When Cosmic Cultures Meet, but they talked about it hypothetically as something we might have to face one day in the future. If such a thing has already occurred, it's of momentous significance.
You gave a speech to the military, which was...
Yes, it was a very interesting opportunity. The pioneer group of White Sands Missile Range invited me to be the keynote banquet speaker to talk to around 200 people from all branches of service. It's very, very rare that they would ask someone to come in who would express the kind of provocative points of view that I do. These are things not often discussed openly in the military circles.
It's extremely timely and very compelling to see that 30 years ago, I was presenting to the founders of America's rocketry and space program things that have become accepted as fact about UFOs, now called UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, or as some would have it, unidentified anomalous phenomena, because some of these craft have shown the ability to travel undersea as well as in outer space. Please take the talk that you're about to see in the context of its time, 30 years ago, an era when the existence of these craft was not at all accepted, in fact was denied by the military and refuted by most members of the scientific establishment. My talk was videotaped and was originally released on VHS as the Golden Anniversary UFO Briefing for the White Sands Missile Range pioneers. When I gave this talk back in 1995, the things I had to say were very controversial. But since that time, most of what I presented that night has been corroborated through whistleblower testimony at congressional hearings. So let's take a look. I invite you to go back in time with me to when I gave this presentation to the founders of America's space and rocketry program, a group that at that time included Clyde Tombaugh, who discovered Pluto. The talk was held at a banquet for the 50th anniversary of the White Sands Missile Range pioneers in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Not far from Roswell, New Mexico, where the famous 1947 crash incident happened. I've had the opportunity to spend the day listening about your great achievements that have spanned 50 years, achievements that I've admired since I was a small boy growing up back east, and the two words White Sands were legend to me. I congratulate you all, and I thank you for the opportunity to talk to you tonight about the Roswell incident. It happened down the block 47 years ago, and the general subject of UFOs and extraterrestrials. I had the opportunity in 1993 and 94, after 5 years of preparatory work, to make this motion picture called Roswell, starring Martin Sheen and Kyle MacLachlan. It took 4 long years to find the backing to make the film. There were a lot of rejections. There were a lot of people who thought no one would be interested in this movie, and they were wrong. We finally got to make it for Showtime. It showed on the cable channel last July and had the good fortune to be nominated for a Golden Globe Award for Best Television Movie of last year. Now it's out on video and in a number of foreign countries. My role with respect to it was executive producer and also co-writer of the story.
For 47 years, they said nothing happened at Roswell. Nothing at all.
This thing was big.
Roswell, the Showtime original movie about an incident they said never happened.
I'm the sheriff of this here county. I'll go where I damn well please. We have our orders.
What the hell are we dealing with here? Is it friendly? Is it hostile? There could be panic if this all came out.
Kyle MacLachlan, Martin Sheen, Roswell. A place, an experience, a mystery.
And I was surprised actually to be invited to come here to speak in New Mexico as a Hollywood producer who had the audacity to make a movie about New Mexico's fondest UFO story and to have made it in Arizona. Today is July 6th, 1995. This was the headline July 8th, 1947. RAAF, Roswell Army Airfield, captures flying saucer on a ranch in the Roswell region. How did that headline come to be? And why did people forget about it for 30 years and then start talking about it in books, movies, news shows, talk shows? The Air Force got very interested in it again all of a sudden after 47 years.
If the cover-up is real, it may well have begun in 1947 at Roswell Army Air Force Base in New Mexico. On July 8, 1947, Roswell's public information officer, Lieutenant Walter Haught, issued a press release in which he said the military had recovered wreckage of a flying saucer that had crashed on a nearby ranch. The story caused an immediate sensation, but 1 day later it was retracted. The military now said that the wreckage was a weather balloon. Oddly, that wreckage was secretly flown to Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, and was never seen again.
Why hasn't the government just said that it's happened? Why were all these people so afraid to speak? It said they kept silence for all these years. Were they threatened?
Well, some of the men who were involved at all different ranks within the military, up to and including Brigadier General, have gone on record as saying that there was a cover-up and that the public wasn't told the full truth, that this was something that was decided back in 1947, the public wasn't ready for, and that the facts were withheld. It took about 30 years after the Roswell incident before Major Jesse Marcel came forward and the cover-up began to unravel.
What I saw, I couldn't believe there was so much of it. It was scattered over such a vast area. So we proceeded to pick up as much of the debris as we could, loaded in a whack. It was not anything from this earth that I'm quite sure of, because I was being an intelligence officer. I was familiar with just about all materials used in aircraft and in our air travel. This is nothing like that.
Barry Goldwater, senator, presidential candidate.
I can't back that up, but I think that at Wright-Patterson Field, if you could get into certain places, you'd find out what the Air Force and the government knows about UFOs. Reportedly, a spaceship landed and it was all hushed up, quieted, and nobody I've never heard about much of it. I called Curtis LeMay and I said, General, I know we have a room at Wright-Patterson where you put all this secret stuff. Can I go in there? I've never heard him get mad, but he got madder than hell at me, cussed me out, said, don't ever ask me that question again.
It was only around 10 days before this headline came out that private pilot businessman Kenneth Arnold in the state of Washington saw 9 objects traveling in formation. He could not believe what he saw. He landed, he reported it to the press, the story went round the world, and it was generally accepted that this was a very honest man, upstanding citizen, very well-trained pilot. How could he have made a mistake? They coined the word flying saucer then. He said they flew through the air sort of like a saucer skipping across water, and a newsman said, you mean like a flying saucer? And there was the word in our language for the first time, just a couple weeks before this. So when this headline came out, and it used the word flying saucer as what had been captured in Roswell, there was no doubt in the mind of anyone in this country that it was referring to one of those things that Kenneth Arnold had talked about, flying 1,700 miles an hour. Couldn't even conceive of that in those days. But a few hours later, within a day, this story was dead. It was retracted. General Ramey, the head of the 8th Air Force, pronounced that it was a mistake. It had just been a weather balloon. I asked Austin Vick, what he thought of the story. He said, well, the Air Force, the military never lies, so it was a weather balloon. So I want to talk to you about all kinds of weather balloons tonight. Ones that fly at all different speeds and altitudes, and that some of you have maybe tracked on radar. I hope that this talk will satisfy the rules of the 3 E's that Austin Vick gave earlier today. And his 3 E's were that it be educational, entertaining, and informative.
Last year's UAP hearing before this Oversight Committee confirmed that UAP-related information is being withheld from senior officials and members of Congress. And just this week, I learned from former DoD official Chris Mellon that satellite imagery of UAP from a few years ago still has not been shared with Congress. Equally concerning, last year's UAP hearing also revealed that elements of the government are engaged in a disinformation campaign to include personal attacks designed to discredit UAP whistleblowers.
We will also hear from the witnesses today allegations of UAP-related misinformation and disinformation by government officials of which they are personally aware and directly experience.
We've used disinformation extremely effectively. The military has. The United States military has won wars through disinformation. The ghost of Hitler, wherever it may be today, still thinks that the invasion of Europe is going to come at Calais, not at Normandy Beach. We deceived him. We deceived the world into thinking we had no Manhattan Project. It was a brilliantly kept secret. I am told that Vice President Truman did not know while he was vice president that we were building the atom bomb. Found out later when he assumed the office of the presidency. How could such secrets be kept? But they were. In the war with Iraq, Saddam Hussein apparently was led to believe that there was going to be invasion by sea, that it was going to be like the Normandy invasion. There was a brilliant military maneuver to do what General Schwarzkopf referred to as the Hail Mary maneuver and go around by land in a way that was never expected. Even the American public had no idea that was coming because our news media promoted the idea of an imminent sea landing. They cooperated with the secret. These have all been effective, useful for our country, and have been the right thing to do at the time. And perhaps for a long time, to deny the existence of UFOs was the right thing to do. There was a study made in 1960 called the Brookings Institution Report. We hadn't gone to the moon yet. President Kennedy declared the mission. And the Brookings Institute think tank was commissioned to consider what the implications would be if, in our voyages to the moon and neighboring planets, we found proof of intelligent extraterrestrial life or artifacts of an extraterrestrial civilization that may have existed long ago. This report was very clear in its findings. They felt at that time in 1960 that such a discovery would be a catastrophe for human civilization. Their report went through group after group of what the effect would be. Religious leaders, missionaries, scientists, they said, would be among those who would be most shocked by the discovery and perhaps disheartened that some other race had gotten to an advanced state first. And the report said that if we made such a discovery, we had to carefully consider the circumstances under which we would release or withhold that information from the public. It's there in black and white. They considered withholding it, not telling us when they knew. If the Roswell incident happens as I portrayed it in the film, they may have known about 13 years before 1960 that intelligent extraterrestrial life existed. But the Brookings Institution report, it even made headlines at that time where they announced that it would mean the end of civilization as we know it if there were such a discovery. And the Brookings Institute recommended further studies to determine how all kinds of various groups would react to such information. It's very curious. When you go to Brookings and you try to get to the bottom of this, of whether they did conduct those other studies that were recommended, you can't get an answer. They won't tell you. So it goes into the silence, like so many of the UFO reports. If the theory is correct, that some of us have known for a long, long time about this and have decided for the benefit of mankind not to tell the group, I think that there were justified reasons that would have been an acceptable scenario back then, 2 years after the war, the biggest war in our history. And even in 1960, when Brookings wrote its report, things were very uncertain, but we are 35 years down the road from that now. We've had an enormous amount of acclamation from movies, from books, from television, from talk shows, from the Freedom of Information Act, which has leaked a lot of information about UFOs. You know, the only other time in history, in my study of history, that I can think of that a kind of strategy was used of holding off making a major announcement for a long, long time, 40 to 50 years, until people were ready. I think of the Bible and Moses, great, wise leader. And it was his decision when he took the chosen people out of Egypt and led them, that he would not lead them straight to Canaan, the promised land, but he would wander with them for 40 years. It wasn't necessary. He could have gotten there much more quickly, but he let 2 generations pass. He didn't want the slaves of Israel who lived in Egypt to be the ones who had found the new kingdom. He wanted a new generation of children who had never known slavery. Well, 2 generations have passed since the days of Roswell. And in recent years, we've had some interesting announcements by our leaders alluding to this subject in very strong ways.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
I think it's more than just an issue of definition.
No, you're getting into definitional problems, and it is difficult. But the fact is, however, that President Reagan said to Mr. Gorbachev one time that if hostile Martians landed on the Earth, we would be together against them.
You're going to hear a quote from a book by a man named Victor Marchetti. It was called The CIA and the Cult of Intelligence. Victor Marchetti was highly placed in the CIA for many years, and in it, he explains the rationale in his own words, like the Brookings Institute report, as to why he feels such information, if in fact it's true, would have been withheld for so long. Let's take a look at this clip.
In 1979, a former CIA official named Victor Marchetti published an article titled How the CIA Views the UFO Phenomenon. In it, he theorized that all major governments are committed to hiding the fact of alien intelligence from the public, for fear that disclosure might, in his words, erode the foundations of Earth's traditional power structure. He went on to say that political and legal systems, religions, economic and social institutions could all soon become meaningless in the minds of the public. Civilization as we know it could collapse into anarchy. Such extreme conclusions are not necessarily valid, he said, but they probably accurately reflect the fears of the ruling classes of the major nations.
The Robertson panel. It was a panel convened by the CIA in the early 1950s to examine the UFO question. They spent around 6 or 8 hours on it, declared that UFOs presented no threat to national security and that there was no proof that any of them were extraterrestrial, and that was the end of the story. But they also recommended in their report in the early 1950s that there should be a national debunking campaign about the idea, because the very belief in the possibility of this on the part of the American public, they said then, could be used by an enemy in the event of an air attack to confuse us, break our will. These were the kinds of expressions that were used back then. So they recommended that teachers discourage young people from reading any books about UFOs. Major Donald Kehoe, who had written many such books and was to write more, claiming that many UFOs had an extraterrestrial origin, his books were debunked. And the Robertson panel also recommended that major film companies such as the Walt Disney Studio be enlisted to make documentaries to tell the public that the UFOs were not real and that there was no extraterrestrial visitation of our planet. Now here it is, we're talking about almost 45 years later. And what is the Walt Disney Company doing now? They're doing the exact opposite of what the Robertson panel recommended in the early 1950s. The Walt Disney Company, within the last few months, released what I consider the most hard-hitting, one-sided documentary on UFOs I've ever seen. One-sided in the sense that they declare they're real, they're here, they've been here a long time. They go so far as to say in this that it is expected that the government is in the process of declassification and that within the next foreseeable future, applying the next year or two, that there will be a flood of information coming out on this subject as the government opens its files. Now, why the most prestigious communication company in America would make a documentary like this and make these statements unless there was some degree of validity to it, I don't know. But here we even have the chief executive officer of Disney, Michael Eisner, one of the most handsomely paid men in America, I might add, sticking his neck out to introduce this show. You're going to see UFOs here mixed with Mickey Mouse. Let's take a look.
Piloted by alien intelligence. One sighting from tens of thousands made over the last 50 years on virtually every continent on the globe. Intelligent life from distant galaxies is now attempting to make open contact with the human race. And tonight, we'll show you the evidence.
Hello, I'm Michael Eisner, head of the Walt Disney Company. In a top-secret military installation somewhere in the United States, there are those who believe that the government is hiding the remains of an alien spacecraft. The idea of creatures from another planet might not be as far-fetched as we once thought.
By the early 1960s, UFOs were having a chilling effect on our defense operations. Their tremendous speed often caused them to be misidentified as incoming intercontinental ballistic missiles. There needed to be some way for the U.S. and the Soviets to distinguish between nuclear attack and alien visitors.
This weapon is installed in the Pentagon, but it's a weapon of peace. This is the teletype that will operate at the U.S. end of an open line to Moscow. This link, it is hoped, will help avoid misunderstandings that could possibly trigger a catastrophe. Now, our president could be in touch with the Russian premier in a matter of seconds.
The front line between Moscow and Washington was set up so they could go ahead and make last-minute pleas that we're not attacking you and you're not attacking us. The purpose for this was to ensure that a nuclear war would not be touched off by a UFO appearing on the scopes and being mistaken for an enemy aircraft.
The hotline eased some international tensions, but it didn't halt the interaction between the military and aliens, which continues to this day.
November of 1975, essentially every SAC base in the United States was visited by UFOs. We have reason to believe that the UFOs went ahead and had some effect on changing the codes, the codes within the missiles, within the launch control facility, to change where the missiles would hit. 1976, September, Iran. 2 F-4s tried to intercept a UFO and shoot upon a UFO. The weapon systems of the planes go dead. The communication systems go dead. These are just 2 examples of cases which sound like they came out of science fiction, but in reality, they're from government documentation. Documents released by the State Department.
E-nail engines up and burning.
September 1991. Space Shuttle Mission 48. Commander Clayton and his crew point their cameras at the planet's horizon for a live broadcast to Earth. Many viewers noticed an alien ship playfully cavorting around the shuttle at tremendous speeds. NASA still refuses to acknowledge the incident. But since that time, the space agency no longer allows public access to live unscrambled television signals from shuttle missions. Currently in 1995, the Federal Emergency Management Agency trains personnel with a manual that suggests techniques in communicating with extraterrestrials encountered in the line of duty. This document is in marked contrast to a federal law passed by Congress in 1969, which makes it illegal for any American to have contact with an extraterrestrial, punishable by a $5,000 fine and a year in jail. Ironically, both documents were composed by a government which refuses to publicly admit that there is intelligent life on other planets.
Indications are that government, military, and scientific leaders will soon release nearly a half-century of official documentation of ongoing alien encounters on Earth. Perhaps they feel it would be too embarrassing not to reveal the truth before the truth reveals itself. But these FBI files acquired through the Freedom of Information Act outline nearly 50 years of UFO reports investigated by federal agents all across America. Overwhelming evidence.
But look carefully. The large area is blacked out in an effort to keep secrets locked away.
If we are keeping information, which I am certain we are, from the American public on unidentified flying objects, then we're wrong. Government has an obligation to the people to tell the truth. No matter what that truth might be, the people have a right to know that planet Earth is being visited by a highly evolved intelligence that is not from this world.
The clip that you've just seen was not presented for entertainment value. It was presented as evidence. Evidence of what the Walt Disney Company, one of the most prominent media companies in the world, was releasing to the public in 1995. And how widely were they releasing it? Well, it was just broadcast in a couple of cities late at night, and then it disappeared. It was broadcast as a test of what the public reaction would be to being confronted with this kind of information about alien intervention in earthly affairs. It wasn't until 2017 when the New York Times came out with a prominent article about the military's Tic Tac UFO sighting that the establishment began to take this whole subject very seriously.
Right, now I'd like to introduce our witnesses. Our first witness is Lieutenant Ryan Graves. He's the Executive Director of Americans for Safe Aerospace. Lieutenant Graves is also a former U.S. Navy F-18 pilot with his own UAP experience. The next witness, David Grush is a former senior intelligence officer with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and was a senior technical advisor for UAP issues. And finally, retired Navy Commander David Fravor, squadron leader who worked as a naval aviator for 18 years. Mr. Fravor has his own UAP experience known as the Tic Tac event. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that all the witnesses answered in the affirmative.
My name is Ryan Fobbs Graves, and I am a former F-18 pilot with a decade of service in the U.S. Navy, including 2 deployments in Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Inherent Resolve. I have experienced advanced UAP firsthand, and I'm here to voice the concerns of more than 30 commercial aircrew and military veterans who have confided their similar encounters with me. Since 2021, all UAP videos are classified as secret or above. This level of secrecy not only impedes our understanding, but fuels speculation and mistrust.
Are you aware of any individuals that are participating in reverse engineering programs for non-terrestrial craft?
Personally, yes.
Do you know any that would be willing to testify if there were protections for them?
Certainly closed door and assurances that breaking their NDA, they're not going to get administratively punished for so. Yeah.
I yield. Sure.
This has gone from a long time ago where you could discredit people because it's some guy living in a Winnebago. You're able to see people now. These are pilots. These are military. These are folks with serious backgrounds.
Unfortunately, there is a growing body of evidence that the U.S. government is not being transparent about what it knows about unidentified anomalous phenomena, and that elements within the military and the IC are in violation of their constitutional duty to notify Congress of their operations. President-elect Donald Trump and former President Barack Obama have both said that the government has information about UAPs that it has not released. I'll show you this example here. This is a presentation from the UATP task force. This is completely absurd. It's nuts, this level of censorship, of redaction on a document. It shows the redaction of how many reports they've collected, for how many years. 2 of the 3 potential explanations are blacked out. The Pentagon and intelligence community is treating us like children. It's time for us to know the truth about this. I think that we can handle it.
When I gave my talk to the White Sands Missile Range pioneers in 1995, officially, UFOs did not exist, and the Air Force had ceased to investigate them with the closing of its Project Blue Book decades earlier. Look how things have changed over the course of the last 30 years.
This is worldwide. I think we suspect what's going on, but I'd also like to thank the members of Congress who have supported our efforts to make this hearing happen. Some have even confided to me that they've had UFO sightings of their own. Those members, of course, some of them wish to remain anonymous, and I'll keep it that way.
I also want to point out in 1966, President Gerald Ford claimed to have seen a UFO, and in 1969 in Georgia, Jimmy Carter claimed to have seen a UFO.
Finally, I'd like to thank these 3 brave witnesses here. They took an oath. To uphold the Constitution of the United States, and dadgummit, they're doing it. And we owe them a debt of gratitude.
In an interview with Fox News, recent former Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe confirmed the U.S. government is aware a lot more sightings of UAPs, and that they have not made that information public. Congress created the All-Domain Resolution Office in the NDAA of 2022. In its initial analysis, there are 171 uncharacterized UAP reports, and this is the words from the report, that appear to have demonstrated unusual flight characteristics or performance capabilities. I believe more information is known about the 171 instances. It's time for Congress to reinsert ourselves. I call on our military leaders and intelligence officials to release more information to the American people about UAPs. We should have disclosure today. We should have disclosure tomorrow. The time has come.
The ultimate question it really becomes this. For what purpose is the federal government overclassifying, because that's what they're doing, they're overclassifying, and forbidding the public for getting access to this? And if you have an explanation, I'm curious, because I know what I've been told. I just want to know from your perspective, why do they overclassify? Mr. Elizondo, you look like you're finger on the button, ready to go.
I think there's several reasons. I think at the time when this reality became evident to the U.S. government, we were in the middle of the Cold War with then Soviet Union, and we did not want to tip our hands to what our knowledge base was on this topic. We did not want to broadcast that to
the Cold War. Cold War is long over.
It is, sir. There's also then the philosophical argument that the Department of Defense and the intelligence community is solution oriented. And when you don't have answers, it's a really tough spot to be in.
It's easier to be quiet, suppressed than if you don't have the answer.
Indeed, sir.
That's one reason why they won't disclose it. It's too painful to admit. And the problem that we have here is you have institutional blockage of what would be normal development of scientific ideas.
And today we've come far past the point where someone coming forward with an anecdote about UFOs or with a blurry photo taken with a Kodak box camera would be presented as the only available evidence. Today, military hardware provides us with sensors, all kinds of sensors, for absolutely proving the existence of these craft that have totally inexplicable flight characteristics that we cannot reproduce. You know, they no longer have the option of making a witness appear to be a fool, simply for coming forward to attempt to reveal something that the government has wished not to be disclosed.
There was only one person who could do this next story about UFO sightings and reports of a possible government cover-up.
It is a pleasure, as it always is, to have our Earthman, our own Earthman, David Garcia, back with us.
This is the story of a UFO that crashed near a military installation some 47 years ago outside Roswell, New Mexico. And though the U.S. Army Air Corps acknowledged the crash, later they retracted their claim. Despite this, witnesses have since emerged, some reluctant, some eager to talk about Roswell and the alleged government cover-up. Now Showtime's made a movie that premieres tonight at the Directors Guild in Hollywood, simply entitled Roswell.
They weren't human, David. I walked in while they were performing their autopsies. God, the stench. People had their hands over their noses. Men I'd never seen before. They were taking all these pictures of these bodies.
Headline Edition with Taylor Grant. From all over the world, wherever the day's headlines were made, Headline Edition brings you a roundup of the latest development in the finding of a flying disc. Late this afternoon, a bulletin from New Mexico suggested that the white...
This one just moved!
This is a scene from the Showtime movie Roswell of an autopsy of a space alien. A crash near Roswell in 47 that many believe was a UFO and the government insists was an Air Force experiment gone wrong has been a cornerstone of the UFO debate ever since.
Secrets can be kept if there's a determination. And also, frankly, this is a secret that's been out in the open for a long time. People have been telling you this on television. You just haven't heard it confirmed by anyone. It's been debunked and denied. It's been in the tabloids, so there's been a will to disbelieve the reports. I believe the men who were there, who have tried for so long to say, something happened there. It wasn't made on this earth. We've been wanting to tell you for a long time. We've been under a constraint not to.
In Hollywood, Carrie Berglund, Channel 9 News.
After our film Roswell premiered on Showtime, the Pentagon released two separate reports purporting to solve the mystery of the Roswell so-called UFO crash once and for all. They denied that UFO, flying saucer, extraterrestrials had anything to do with the incident.
Next, an Air Force report on a 1947 incident in Roswell, New Mexico. Yesterday, the Air Force issued a report at the Pentagon that they hope will close the book on rumors that they recovered a flying saucer and extraterrestrial bodies near Roswell 50 years ago and then covered it up. During this news conference, you'll hear from Colonel John Haynes of the Air Force Declassification Review Team.
This is a single subject briefing today on the release of an Air Force report titled The Roswell Report, Case Closed.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're confident once the report is out and digested by the public that this will be the final word on the Roswell incident. The conclusion of the first report left no doubt that what was recovered near Roswell, New Mexico in July 1947 was debris from a formerly top-secret Army Air Forces research project, codenamed Mogul. Mogul was an attempt to acoustically detect Soviet nuclear blast and ballistic missile launches. Mogul used an odd assortment of equipment carried aloft by a balloon train more than 600 feet long. This balloon train consisted of 25 balloons, attached acoustic devices, and several radar reflectors, which looked like box kites. In 1947, it was the misidentification of these radar reflectors that is most likely the famous flying disc.
Of course, UFO researcher Kevin Randall later pointed out that the spy balloon was not launched at the time of the Roswell incident, that in fact the planned launch had been scrubbed. But that didn't stop the Pentagon from declaring that now the case was closed. Kevin Randall, by the way, is the author of many well-researched books on UFOs and was the co-author with Donald Schmidt of the book UFO Crash at Roswell, which in fact is the book upon which we based the Showtime film. Kevin Randall, in fact, was a captain in the U.S. Air Force in intelligence who had served in both the Vietnam War and the war in Iraq.
Today, we're releasing the final report to address questions about alleged bodies associated with the Roswell story. Bodies observed in the New Mexico desert were probably test dummies that were carried aloft by U.S. Air Force high-altitude balloons for scientific research.
The problem with the report, of course, was that crash dummies were not tested in the area till about 5 or 6 years after the Roswell incident. So their explanation for this discrepancy in time was quite interesting.
Colonel, how do you square the UFO enthusiasts saying that they're talking about 1947, well, you're talking about dummies used in the 50s, almost a decade later?
Well, I'm afraid that's the problem that we have with time compression. I don't know what they saw in 47, but I'm quite sure it probably was Project Mogul. But I think if you find that people talk about things over a period of time, they begin to lose exactly when the date was.
Why do you think people in Roswell and elsewhere still are not convinced, no matter what you say?
I'm sorry, but I just can't answer that question for them. Whether you accept that as the Roswell information, I quite frankly don't know. But we do because it overlays so well with this period of time. Yes, ma'am.
Colonel, let me just clear up two things that you sort of brushed over quickly. Number one was the time frame that people are going to say, but this is 10 years. How could they possibly make a mistake on the 10 years? And number two, you said it was never classified, and yet why didn't people at the time say, well, my goodness, we were having dummy tests, this explains the answer?
Well, the dummy test, actually, you need to get the book. The dummy tests get lots of media attention, and I have it tabbed, and I should be able to find it, but quite frankly, I'm sitting here and my knees are shaking. I don't know why they can't associate that time period. I'm sorry, I just don't have any information for that. All I know is what the Air Force did, and that if you overlay much of their claims and you look at the Air Force scientific research, you can see it's obvious that what we're talking about at Roswell, and I don't mean Roswell in 47 because that was Project Mogul. That was unmanned. I want to make that very clear. And that's the first report. But over that period of time, dummies were dropped all around there.
Can you help us with when the dummies were first used? What year?
53.
So they also say that these figures were much smaller stature than full-size adult figures. How do you reconcile that?
I don't reconcile that. I just have no idea why they say that. Quite frankly, this is probably what it was.
You keep using the word probably, and you say case closed. Those two don't jive.
Yeah,
How do you
right.
reconcile that?
Okay, let me say, from the Air Force perspective, that's exactly what it was.
Let me just go back one more time that you say this is case closed and people should now believe it, but with the major hole, though, of you're saying that they're wrong about the date, and the date being 6 years' time that they're wrong about. What explanation can you give them other than just saying, well, we just think they're just mistaken by 6 years?
Ma'am, I have no other explanation. I'm sorry. I have no other explanation. I'm looking at the facts as we have studied them, and I have no other explanation for that but what I've already given.
But how would that make it case closed?
Because we've reviewed all the relevant information,
and we have finished this, and we're not going to revisit it. Yes, sir.
Does the Air Force have any evidence at all of any sort of spacecraft wreckage or extraterrestrial presence on them?
Yes, sir.
Is that one follow-up? How do you know? I mean, your name is now, Colonel John Haynes is going to go down in UFO lore as one of the people who took part, in the minds of some people, in the continuing cover-up by the government. How do you know that you're not being used? How do you know that you know the full story when you stand up there? Tell us that there's no evidence of this.
Because our job is to review all the Air Force documents for this era. And that's how we came up with this exciting and interesting and intriguing, quite frankly, report.
Colonel Haynes said it was their job to review all of the relevant documents from that period of time, but of course this was impossible because, as proven by a report from the General Accounting Office, all of the outgoing messages that would have clarified what happened at Roswell, all of those outgoing messages in 1947 were destroyed, apparently without authorization, by persons unknown.
Recently, there were a lot of sightings out in Arizona of supposed UFOs.
If you're interested in the Arizona question, I suggest that you contact the local authorities in Arizona and see what they have to say, because the Air Force no longer does any investigation of UFOs.
It was so technologically advanced that it was a thrilling feeling to see it. The lights were really brilliant.
And it was just fascinating. It was enormous. It just felt otherworldly. You know, in your gut, you could just tell it was otherworldly. It has never been identified to this date. And I suspect that unless the Defense Department proves us otherwise, that it was probably some form of an alien spacecraft.
You're confident that you're not part of any cover-up, wittingly or unwittingly?
I'm totally confident. But I think Colonel Weaver, you might have seen him on TV earlier, said it best. We can't even keep single secrets. How could we have a conspiracy or a cover-up?
It was previously testified that there was biologics that were collected. Are you aware of any of that?
I am, sir, aware of the reporting that biologics have been recovered.
And joining me now is co-author Don Schmidt, who wrote the bestseller UFO Crash at Roswell, on which this film is based. Good morning, Don.
Good morning, Dave. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Let me ask you this. The Roswell incident, probably the most reported, most documented, won't go away, can't be solved, or won't be solved. What is there about this incident that keeps the public interest?
Well, it's like a veil over a light. The truth keeps trying to come out. And many of these people, especially the witnesses, much to their credit, after almost 50 years, feel all the more compelled that the public know the truth. And I think in the long litany of cover-ups in recent times, that this probably would be the tip of the iceberg.
Real quick summation. Something crashed, farmer reported it, military went and investigated it, Major Jess Marcel. The Army announced it's a flying saucer.
And actually, there was an actual press release. They had
newspaper stories, right?
A flying saucer.
Later they said
no,
flooded. Weather balloon.
That's correct.
Okay, and then huge hue
and
cry.
something like that would never happen by today's standards. I mean, the press would be clamoring for the truth no matter what. But back at that time, probably the most patriotic time within the history of this country, immediately following World War II, and the press and the people accepted everything the government told them.
More than 30 witnesses have come forward, and almost 5,000 Americans have joined us in the fight for transparency at safeaerospace.org. The majority of witnesses are commercial pilots at major airlines. Often, they are veterans with decades of flying experience. Pilots are reporting UAP at altitudes that appear above them at 40,000 feet, potentially in low Earth orbit or in the gray zone below the Kármán line, making inexplainable maneuvers like right-hand turns and retrograde orbits or J-hooks. Sometimes these reports are reoccurring, with numerous recent sightings north of Hawaii and in the North Atlantic. Other veterans are also coming forward to us regarding UAP encounters in our airspace and oceans. The most compelling involve observations of UAP by multiple witnesses and sensor systems. I believe these accounts are only scratching the surface, and more will share their experiences once it is safe to do so. The American people deserve to know what is happening in our skies. It is long overdue.
Briefly, you mentioned you're working with 30 pilots right now that have had encounters with UAPs, but you've also, I believe, discussed and we know of many more pilots. This is just those that you're currently working with. Is that correct? Can you expand on that?
Certainly. I'll break that down in two ways. First, When we were first experiencing these objects off the eastern seaboard in the 2014 to 2015 time period, anyone that had upgraded their radar systems were seeing these objects. So there was a large number of my colleagues that were detecting these objects off the eastern seaboard. They were further correlating that information with the other onboard sensors, and many of them also had their own eye sightings as well of these objects. Now, that was our personal firsthand experience at the time. Since then, as I've engaged this topic, others have reached out to me that share their experiences, both on the military side as well as the commercial aviation side.
Is it possible that the Air Force could have missed something in its investigation? In other words, is it possible that there are unidentified flying objects, that there are extraterrestrial visits, and the Air Force simply has not found it or been able to detect it?
We have researched the Air Force projects and the Air Force information for these year groups. We have nothing else to say about them. You know, we don't believe there's anything else. I have no way of even vaguely believing there's anything else. Yes, sir.
Well, about 50 years ago today, a Air Force pilot spied a big array of saucers supposedly flying over Washington State. That may have started all this. Does the Air Force think it will never again investigate these reports? Is Project Blue Book was the end and that's it?
You know, I don't ever want to speak for the Air Force about never again, but it's my opinion that they will not.
Why then didn't the Air Force provide these very readily explanations for UFO activity when these questions first started being surfaced?
Well, this information was uncovered as we were preparing to publish that first book. We were actually looking for pictures. We had looked at all the information that surrounded 1947 and found absolutely nothing. But as we got into the out years, we realized that the Air Force had some other quite intriguing experiments that were going on that could be misconstrued.
Do you believe in UFOs?
Personally, no, sir.
Why not? Good.
Ma'am, I have no reason to believe that they're real.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
As we convene here, UAP are in our airspace, but they are grossly underreported. These sightings are not rare or isolated, they are routine. Military aircrew and commercial pilots, trained observers whose lives depend on accurate identification, are frequently witnessing these phenomena. The stigma attached to UAP is real and powerful and challenges national security. It silences commercial pilots who fear professional repercussions, discourages witnesses, and is only compounded by recent government claims questioning the credibility of eyewitness testimony.
Are there classified Department of Defense materials related to UAPs that you believe could be safely disclosed to the public without compromising national security?
Yes, sir, I do.
Gilbert Moore spoke to us earlier today about a Greek god named Talos. It's the name of a missile. And, well, we've had a lot of Greek gods involved in the space program, haven't we? We've had our Mercury program, the Gemini program, Apollo. But we were talking about Talos, and Gilbert Moore has said he got into a lot of trouble with the military by saying that stood for try and launch on schedule. When it comes to UFOs, I think that Talos should stand for try and look objectively sometimes. Now, why do I qualify that with sometimes? If you're too objective, if you're too locked into a certain mindset, you may miss seeing what's really there. And there have been a lot of examples of this in science. One of them happened within the last decade. It had to do with the ozone layer. We didn't notice that the data was telling us that there was a huge ozone hole over Antarctica. We had the data, it came back from the satellite, but we discounted it. We were too objective. We just knew that there couldn't be a hole that big. So we rejected the data that was staring us in the face for 5 years. And finally we woke up and we took a look at that data and we said, whoops, we've got a problem. But for 5 years we had an attitude that stopped us from seeing the data. I want to go back in history and mention some other similar kinds of problems, I think, that relate to the problem of the science of ufology and the investigation of UFOs and where it stands today. Let's go back to the time of Galileo. He said the Earth went around the sun, not the other way around, and he was arrested, spent 8 years under house arrest for holding that belief. Finally had to take it back. There's a gentleman with us tonight who I understand discovered Pluto. Galileo discovered
few moons going around Jupiter. Asked the cardinals to come by, take a look in his telescope, see the moons. They wouldn't look. They refused to look. Because they knew a priori that there could not be moons revolving around Jupiter, they had no need to look at the data. And about 300 years later, the church forgave Galileo for having been right. It happened again with Nikola Tesla. He invented AC current. It's serving this city tonight, and I believe I'm correct in saying every city in the world. But Thomas Edison wasn't impressed with the theory of AC current. He was locked into DC current. Couldn't light a city with that. He impeded Mr. Tesla. Told him his idea would never work. He was wrong. A lesser-known scientist, very controversial thinker, Immanuel Velikovsky, wrote a book called Worlds in Collision, talking about the possibility that Venus may have strayed into its orbit from somewhere else long ago and created catastrophe on Earth. He was ridiculed. Ridiculed like many people who have reported UFO sightings have been ridiculed, ostracized, made to seem like kooks. He was a kook of the scientific community, rejected at every university. But one of his predictions connected with his writings was that the planet Jupiter would emit radio waves. And the week that Albert Einstein died, Worlds in Collision, Velikovsky's book was open on his desk as he was rereading and reconsidering the theories of Velikovsky, which he had long rejected because it had been confirmed about the radio waves and Jupiter. Charles Darwin was another example. Boy, did we have a fight about evolution. Remember that one? They passed a law in Tennessee. You couldn't teach it in the schools. They arrested a man named John Scopes for teaching the theory of evolution that man wriggled up from the apes, for questioning the idea that the Lord created the world in 6 days. And there was quite a trial over that. William Jennings Bryan came down to defend the Bible, Clarence Darrow to defend what he thought was the right of a man to think.
Now, Howard, how does man come out of this slimy mess?
The right of a man to think and speak has something to do with this question of UFOs. There are many people who have been speaking and saying they've seen these things, but we have an official policy on it. They don't exist. If you've seen them, you either saw the results of a temperature inversion, or you saw the planet Venus, you saw a flock of birds, you saw a weather balloon, but you didn't see anything that confounds the laws of physics as we understand it. What do we learn from all of this? We learn that in our certainty that we understand, in our certainty that the last 200 years of science has taught us the bulk of what there is to know about the universe, we have blinded ourselves again and again. We've closed doors that should have been opened. And my talk tonight is a plea to open a door, because I believe that there is something profound to the data of extraterrestrial life.
Do you feel adequately trained and briefed on how to handle encounters with UAPs?
No. Right now, military witnesses to UAP have limited options for reporting UAP. But more concerning is that commercial aviation sector has not adapted to the lessons that the military has implemented. The military and Department of Defense has stated that UAP represent a critical aviation safety risk. We have not seen that same language being used in the commercial markets. They are not acknowledging this risk.
Okay. What steps do you think you have to be taken to improve a pilot's UAP reporting, be it military or commercial?
Right now, we need a system where pilots can report without fear of losing their jobs. There's a fear that the stigma associated with this topic is going to lead to professional repercussions, either through management or perhaps through their yearly physical check. So having a secure system, reducing the stigma, and making this information available through the public is going to reduce the concerns that aircrew have.
Mr. Graves, again, I'd like to know, how do you know that these were not our aircraft?
Some of the behaviors that we saw in a working area, we would see these objects being at 0.0 Mach, that's zero airspeed, over a certain pieces of the ground. So what that means, just like a river, if you throw a bobber in, it's going to float downstream. These objects were staying completely stationary in Category 4 hurricane winds. These same objects would then accelerate to supersonic speeds, 1.1, 1.2 Mach, and they would do so in very erratic and quick behaviors that I don't have an explanation for.
Aircraft that are being witnessed, particularly by the 30 folks that you're working with, are essentially outside the scope of anything that we know of today and the technology we have today. So, Mr. Graver?
Yeah, I concur with that. We have nothing that can stop in midair and go the other direction, nor do we have anything that can, like in our situation, come down from space, hang out for 3 hours, and go back up.
Many dismiss UAP reports as classified weapons testing by our own government. But in your experience as a pilot, does our government typically test advanced weapon systems right next to multi-million-dollar jets without informing our pilots?
No, we have test ranges for that.
Based off of each of your experiences and observations, do you believe UAPs pose a potential threat to our national security?
Yes, and here's why. The technology that we faced was far superior than anything that we had, and you could put that anywhere. If you had one, you captured one, you reverse engineered it, you got it to work, you're talking something that can go into space, go someplace, drop down in a matter of seconds, do whatever it wants, and leave. And there's nothing we can do about it. Nothing.
Did the Tic Tac UAP move in such a way that defied the laws of physics?
The way we understand them, yes.
It took over 15 years for your encounter with the Tic Tac to be declassified. Do you feel there was a good reason to prevent lawmakers from having access to this footage?
No, I just think it was ignored when it happened, and it just sat somewhere in a file. Never got reported.
In your career, have you ever seen a propulsion system that creates no thermal exhaust?
No.
Can you describe how the aircraft maneuvered?
Abruptly, very determinate. It knew exactly what it was doing. It was aware of our presence, and it had acceleration rates. I mean, it went from 0 to matching our speed in no time at all.
Now, if the fastest plane on Earth was trying to do these maneuvers that you saw, would it be capable of doing that?
No, not even close.
And just to confirm, this object had no wings, correct?
No wings.
This flying Tic Tac, I mean, is it capable of being the product of any other nation on the Earth?
No, like I said earlier, I think it defies current material science and the ability to develop that much propulsion. And I know there's been some physicists have done calculations, which is beyond anything that we have.
Mr. Gress, finally, do you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
And where?
I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General and some of which to the intelligence committees. I actually had the people with the firsthand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General.
Are there common characteristics to the UAPs that have been cited by different pilots, and can you describe what the convergence of descriptions is?
Certainly. We were primarily seeing dark gray or black cubes inside of a clear sphere.
I'm sorry, dark gray or black cubes?
Yes, inside of a clear sphere, where the apex or tips of the cube were touching the inside of that sphere. And that was primarily what was being reported when we were able to gain a visual tally of these objects. That occurred over almost 8 years. And as far as I know, it's still occurring. There's a small bit of anger, I would say. I would feel that those pilots are still facing that difficulty in reporting this topic, and they don't have the tools to be able to mitigate this issue. It just goes to show how serious this is and why this is such an important issue for our pilots and for our nation.
Mr. Crush, what about you? What was your experience after you came forward?
Well, it's only been about 2 months or so I guess my experience has been overwhelming support from former colleagues of mine that have privately messaged me, and I do appreciate that. But I do have knowledge of active planned reprisal activity against myself and other colleagues, and it's very, very upsetting to me.
Coming from where?
Certain senior leadership at previous agencies I was associated with. And that's all I'll say publicly, but I can provide more details in a closed environment.
Okay. Well, I hope you understand that there would be bipartisan rejection of any attempt to vilify, demonize, or engage in other reprisals against our witnesses and people who are telling the truth from their perspective.
Yeah, there were certain colleagues of mine that were brutally administratively attacked, and it actually makes me very upset as a leader to see that happen to other coworkers and actually superiors of mine over the last 3 years.
How do you account for that response? That seems like a bizarre response.
I call it administrative terrorism. That's their quiver, their tool in the toolbox to silence people, especially, the career government service cares about their career, cares about their clearance, their reputation to climb the ladder. And when you threaten that career path, a lot of people back off.
At one point, you had said that there has been harmful activity or aggressive activity. Has any of the activity been aggressive, been hostile in your reports?
I know of multiple colleagues of mine that got physically injured.
By UAPs or by people within the federal government? Oath. Okay, so there has been activity by alien or non-human technology and or beings that has caused harm to humans.
I can't get into the specifics in an open environment, but at least the activity that I personally witnessed, and not to be very careful here, because they tell you never to acknowledge tradecraft, right? So what I personally witnessed myself and my wife was very disturbing.
Okay.
If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies of the pilots related to this loft?
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
Are you aware of any individuals that are participating in reverse engineering programs for non-terrestrial craft?
Personally, yes. Mm-hmm.
You've said that U.S. has intact spacecraft. You said that the government has alien bodies or alien species. Have you seen the spacecraft?
I have to be careful to describe what I've seen firsthand and not in this environment, but I could answer that question behind closed doors.
And have you seen any of the bodies?
That's something I've not witnessed myself. And they saw a sequence of 4 craft in a clear diamond formation for which there is a radar sequence that I alone have observed in the United States Congress. One of the pilots goes to check out that diamond formation and sees a large floating, what I can only describe as an orb. Again, like I said, not of any human capability that I'm aware of. And when he approached, he said that his radar went down. He said that his FLIR system malfunctioned and that he had to manually take this image from one of the lenses, and it was not automated in collection as you would typically see in a test mission. So I guess I'll start with Commander Fravor. How should we think about the fact that this craft that was approached by our pilot had the capability of disarming a number of the sensor and collection systems on that craft?
Well, I think this goes to that national security side, and you can go back to our history of things showing up at certain areas and disabling our capabilities, which is disheartening. And for us, I mean, like I said, it completely disabled the radar on the aircraft when it tried to do it, and the only way we could see it is passively, which is how we got that image. So I think that's a concern on what are these doing, not only how do they operate, but their capabilities inside to do things like this.
What is, can you tell us anything about this myth of Area 51, which has become part of everything from Hollywood movies to a local legend? What is Area 51? Is there such a place, and what does it do?
That actually should be outside this brief. Let me ask you a question. If you are talking about Groom Lake, Nevada, is that what you're talking about?
I'm talking about the scene everybody remembers from the movie Independence Day.
My daughter asked me the same question. There is a facility in Groom Lake, Nevada. Quite frankly, I have no knowledge or expertise in the matters. I understand there are classified things that go on there, and that's all I have to say about it. Yes, sir.
Let's go back to that so-called Area 51, because in people's minds, when you say I can't talk about it because it's classified, conjures up, oh, there it is. There's the cover-up. Can you give us any hint, without violating any sense of confidential nature, what kinds of things might be happening?
Sir, I cannot. Forgive me. I just do not know.
Is there anyone in the Air Force that can?
I'm going to have to defer that to public affairs. It's outside of my area of expertise. Forgive me, but it's just outside of my area of expertise.
Probably the most amazing thing about Area 51 is the fact that this is literally the only place in the world where you can go out and actually see flying saucers on a timetable basis. You can literally go out there on a Wednesday night between about 7 and 1 a.m. and you'll see these things flying up and down the valley. It's absolutely amazing. On even a bad night, you'll have 10, 11, 12 sightings. On a good night, and I've been out there with friends of mine camping, on a good night, the sky will just rip open with these things. You'll see anywhere between 20 to 40 objects in a night testing over the base for anywhere from 15 minutes to 45 minutes at a time. You'll see these objects flying up and down the valley. We've had people where these objects have flown right over their heads as they've gotten out, fumbled for their cameras and then shot away. Area 51 is the single most amazing thing because, first off, we know the military's got them. Second off, in their pure arrogance, they really don't care whether or not we see them or not. And third off, it's much easier to make us look crazy because we're just civilians out there than it is to test this stuff over their own land, over Nellis Air Force Base, where experts or people that have something to do with a project or security personnel can actually come forward and expose this project. But I'm hoping that Area 51 is going to be the camel's nose under the tent, that enough people are going to go out there and start seeing these things, enough people who are skeptical about it, who are going to see these things for themselves and realize, by God, there's something there, because this is the singular most important scientific advance in the history of the human race.
Well, we've come a long way toward the disclosure of the evidence and the facts about UFOs, or UAPs, as they're referred to now in official circles. The days when witnesses would be ostracized, debunked, ridiculed, those coming forward perhaps with a story about being abducted by aliens, when it would all just be categorically dismissed. Those days hopefully are behind us as more and more information creeps out from behind the security classifications and comes into public view.
It was stated explicitly to me by these test pilots that if you have a UAP experience, the best thing you can do for your career is forget it and not tell anyone. Because any type of reporting, either above the surface or below the surface, does have a perceived consequence to these people. And that is a culture we must change if we want to get to the truth.
That was really close. Series 31 is out of 340 on the traffic.
Ask them if they want to report officially.
EWA 517, do you want to report a UFO? Over. EWA 517, do you want to report a UFO? Over. Negative. We don't want to report. Aries 31, do you wish to report a UFO? Over. Negative, we want to report one of those either.
For each of you, yes or no question, based off of your own experience or the data that you've been privy to, is there any indication that these UAPs could be essentially collecting reconnaissance information? Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Mr. Brush?
Fair assessment, yeah.
Mr. Fravor?
Very possible.
Again, in the national security vein, is it possible that these UAPs would be probing our capabilities? Yes or no, Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Rush?
Yes.
Fravor?
Definitely.
Is it possible that these UAPs are testing for vulnerabilities in our current systems?
Yes. Yes. Possible.
Do you feel, based off of your experience and the information that you've been privy to, that these UAPs provide an existential threat to the national security of the United States? Mr. Graves?
Potentially.
Yes, sir, potentially.
Same answer, potentially. Yeah, I'd say definitely, potentially.
Mr. Graves and Fravor, in the event that your encounters had become hostile, would you have had the capability to defend yourself, your crew, your aircraft?
Absolutely not.
Sir?
No.
Based off of the information that you've been privy to, is there any indication that these UAPs are interested in our nuclear technology and capabilities? Yes.
Sure, that could be a fair assessment, yeah. Yes.
Mr. Grush, in the last couple of years, have you had incidences that have caused you to be in fear for your life for addressing these issues?
Yes, personally. Yeah.
I just want everyone to note that he's coming forward in fear of his life. To put in perspective, if they were really not scared about this information coming out, why would someone be intimidated like that?
We often like to believe that in our 100 years of technology that's just taken place, that we've answered all the questions. We haven't. And if we have to face the situation of coming face to face with beings whose civilization could have preceded us by millions of years, what an experience of humility that will be for all of us.
And in conclusion, I think it's things that we should be talking about, sharing with each other what information we have. We should be open about it, because I think the bottom line here is that Brookings was 35 years ago, and that when we do get all this information out, we'll go on, and science will go on. And I thank you very much for having me as your guest tonight. Thank you.
On behalf of the White Sands Pioneer Group, and for making a trip all the way from Los Angeles here, we would like to present you, as a token of our appreciation for making this speech, a belt buckle commemorating the 50th anniversary of White Sands.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Doctor.